Good evening, everyone. This is Mark Molina, CEO of Molina Leadership and Business Development Solutions. Tonight, we are hosting a candidate forum for the Lane County District Attorney race. We have with us the incumbent, Patty Perlow, and her opponent, James Cleavenger. This is a 1-hour forum, and we're looking forward to hearing from both candidates. The ground rules have already been established. And for those of you that are logging on, we look forward to allowing you to participate with this process. Patricia, James, welcome. Thank you very much for your willingness to participate this evening in this forum. And we'll begin with opening statements. Let me get the clock ready. And as the incumbent, Patricia, we'll begin with you. You have 3 minutes to make an opening statement to the voters.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Patty Perlow. I'm your elected district attorney. I was appointed in 2015 by Governor Brown. I was elected in May of 2016 to a 4-year term, which I'm now seeking re-election for another 4 years. When I took this office, we had just gone through, from 2012, losing a third of the staff. And the culture was that we couldn't do things because we didn't have the resources. My first goal was to turn around the culture to what can we do with what we have. And so we increased filings by about 1,500 in the first year of viable felony cases that wouldn't have been filed before. I then leveraged or obtained grant funding working with community partners to rehire lawyers or hire lawyers into the office to continue growing and increasing our prosecutions. Those grants helped create some programs for Lane County, the first being a prison diversion program for high-risk property offenders, providing them intensive supervision, mentorship, programming, housing, and the recidivism rates from that program have actually been far better than traditional probation or post-prison supervision from prison. The first few years of that program were in a random control trial, so only half of the people participating got full service. So now we have the random control trial over. We need to sustain the funding and increase the funding so we can continue that program. The second initiative was a mental health court. That took a year to get into place. It is now a successful program. It required working with the court, get buy-in to add a docket, a judge, community partners had to come together to make that work, and it's a successful program. I'm currently working on an initiative to open a resource center and a shelter for homeless youth. That, again, has taken a year to get us to this point. The resource center should be opening soon with cooperation from the court helping us, and hopefully the shelter will be open in the fall before the cold weather. My goals are to invest in programs that help children to keep them out of the criminal justice system. And going forward, we're in a huge economic crisis right now, and you need experienced leadership to take you through that so that we don't have to crawl out of the ashes like we did after 2012 with losing a third of the staff and having to create things. We don't want to lose the programs that we have going right now that are so successful. And we don't want to lose the staff that we have now. We don't want to lose the partnerships we have in Lane County. We are looking at 17% funding cut from the state in the next biennium. You need strong leadership to get us through this, to continue the great work that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you. James, your opening statement, sir.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm James Cleavenger. I'm running for district attorney to bring accountability, fairness, transparency, and trust back to our criminal justice system. You know, for decades now, our DA has been handpicked by their predecessors and rubber stamped by the governor, and they usually run unopposed. I'm trying to break that cycle of nepotism, and as an attorney, police officer, and a former whistleblower against a large, powerful law enforcement agency and institution, I believe I've proven that I have the experience and the courage necessary to stand up to powerful interests and challenge the status quo so that we can reshape the office to truly reflect what our community standards are. I've been a Lane County resident for 15 years now. As a licensed attorney since 2009, I clerked for 4 years in federal court for U.S. District Judge Michael McShane, but I also served 2 summers for him in state court, where I worked on 2 capital murder trials. And I'm currently in part-time private practice in Eugene. As a police officer for over a decade now, I've had the honor of serving the communities of Junction City, Coburg, and now Oak Ridge, where I've seen firsthand how the system is failing. In Junction City and Coburg, I was working as a reserve police officer, which is a part-time officer, usually unpaid, to do the same job as a full-time police officer. And for most of that time, I was working full-time in law with Judge McShane. I've now flipped that, and I'm a part-time lawyer and full-time police officer. But in all these communities I've served, I've been asked by citizens and also members of law enforcement, what can we do to fix the problems we're seeing? The problems we were seeing, especially in the small communities, is that just a lot of cases were not getting prosecuted. Now, I'm not saying that every case should be prosecuted, and I'm not saying that every offender should be thrown in jail and the key thrown away. I'm very much am in favor of their alternatives to mass incarceration, and I believe that we should use increased funding for mental health and drug addiction treatment services. It's a long ride to jail from Oak Ridge, and I speak to these guys at length when I arrest them, and they actually do want the help, but they're not getting it. Part of that is they need to actually be charged with some of these drug crimes to get the court-mandated help, and that's just simply hasn't been happening. I also want to increase the transparency of the office. I think that dash cam and body cam videos should be immediately released after major incidents that affect the community. And I believe that law enforcement should have the ability to release their own press releases. And just generally, I'd like to increase and better the relationships with law enforcement, community groups, and everyone.
Thank you. First question I have is for both of you. Patty, I'll start with you. What is your definition of justice? And do you believe that the Lane County District Attorney's Office has been providing justice to the residents of the county?
So justice isn't coming just from the Lane County District Attorney's Office. The definition of justice is the right outcome under the circumstances for somebody who's entering the criminal justice system, either as a defendant or a victim, and for the community as a whole. And so is justice being achieved? Our efforts every day are to do the right thing for the right reason, to achieve justice and create a safe community for the people of Lane County. There are circumstances, well, for example, right now, there is no justice happening for the cases that are of out of custody defendants. Those cases are all delayed. Victims are not getting heard. The cases aren't getting into court. And so right now, justice is delayed, and justice delayed is justice denied. But as a whole, every effort that we make in the Lane County District Attorney's Office is to protect the community, hold people accountable for the crimes they commit, and support the victims of those crimes.
Thank you. James, same question for you. What is your definition of justice? And do you believe that the Lane County District Attorney's Office is providing justice for the residents?
Well, I would agree with most of those assessments my opponent has made, but I believe that part of justice is fairness, but it's also access to that justice. It's basically having your day in court. And I found that that's been denied to so many people, especially victims, where if the cases are never heard, they never get a chance to have their day in court. And I don't think that's been happening. And that's what really needs to change, is that the culture needs to change at the DA's office. Right now, we're getting about 20-25% of our cases are actually prosecuted. And again, I'm not saying they all can be, but I think there are certainly a number of examples where the DA's office should have had a bit more courage and actually charge some of these crimes so that the victims could have their day in court. That's my answer.
Thank you. Patty, would you like an opportunity to respond to that?
Yes, I would, Mark. We file every case for which there is sufficient proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so because a police agency may be smaller, under-resourced, doesn't have the training that a larger agency might have access to, a lot of the investigations we receive, we can't go forward on. And it would be a violation of our ethical obligations to file cases that we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have here, and we have 4 pages of questions that have come in. I just want to repeat for all those that are logging on that have come in from different areas of the community. The next question I have is for James. This question is, what is your knowledge of the role of a district attorney? And do you feel that you are prepared to enter, if you win this election, that you're prepared to fully execute the responsibilities of the office with your limited experience?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people have criticized me because they've said, well, I don't have any experience as an actual district attorney. That's true. It would actually be a conflict of interest for me to be a police officer and then also the prosecutor at the district as the district attorney. That I might as well just be the judge too. So that's true. I don't have that particular experience. What I do have is years of experience working for the courts, watching court, and the legal opinions that I draft for the judge become precedent. They become law. And so to say I don't have experience at all, I think is false. There's also the fact that, so, you know, we're getting 75% of our cases no file. What we do a lot of times is we take the charges that we can and bring those to Muni court after the DA has declined to charge. And I prosecute those cases at the Muni court level. And I realize it's, you know, smaller potatoes, but at least those victims are getting their day in court. And I've taken most of those cases that are dumped by the DA, I'll take to Muni court and I win. Obviously, sometimes I lose, but I'm willing to take those risks in order to let people have justice.
Okay, thank you. Patricia, you want a chance to respond to that?
I would. The role of district attorney is an incredibly challenging, it's a hard job. And I've been in this office for 30 years as a prosecutor. I tried a lot of cases at every level so that I can mentor the people in this office. There's a staff of over 80 people, counting full and part-time, that need to be guided, that need to be supervised, that need to be evaluated. Sometimes there are issues with represented personnel. You need to understand working within bargaining units. There are, the budget's $11 million. You can't just have somebody come in with no experience in management, let alone budgeting, let alone criminal prosecution, to take over this very important role.
Thank you. James, did you want to rebuttal about your management?
Yeah, just a bit. I think she's right in that the DA's job is actually not to be in court herself. I believe the last time she was in court prosecuting herself was 2015. So it is management of people is the primary job of the district attorney. So again, those that say, well, I don't have enough experience in court prosecuting cases, one, I don't think that's true, but two, that's really not the job of the DA. The DA is to set the tone, manage staff, and identify priorities for the office.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is a good conversation to have. We have some of the other questions, so we're going to stick with this theme currently. One of the other questions, James, that has come in is your lack of experience in court as either a prosecutor and a defender. how do you, with that lack of experience, how can you be an effective district attorney in mentoring, dealing with cases, dealing with the specificity of the cases, and ensuring that cases meet those legal requirements?
Well, Mark, as they say, it takes a village. And I don't think I'm going to be alone in mentoring new attorneys. There are a number of wonderful attorneys in the office already who I can lean on for their guidance. In cases that I've done in my private practice, I'm usually working with law firms and groups of attorneys figuring out issues for their clients. It's done as a group process. So I don't think the burden would ever only be on my shoulders to do that. Things that I can change and affect are the makeup of the assistant DAs. Currently there's not a single assistant DA of color, and I find that somewhat troublesome. The diversity is lacking, and I think there are ways to improve that.
Okay. Well, you still have some time if you're.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, I've been around the courtroom quite a bit at state court level, federal court level, muni court level for over a decade now. So it's the idea that I'm going to come into court and have no idea where I'm at is just false.
Thank you. I had started your time a little bit late. I'm trying to focus on the people coming in too, so I apologize. One of the questions, Patty, that came in today was, can you explain what is your training and recruitment and retainment process for district attorneys?
Okay, so the district attorney is the person who is ultimately responsible for everything that happens in this office. My signature, my name is on every document that goes forward. And the attorneys who work here are appointed by me to represent me, and I am ultimately responsible for everything that happens. And so when we talk about recruitment, most of the recruitment comes from the prosecution clinic. We've done some recruitment from other DA's offices around the state. We look for people that will be a very short learning curve, because it is a super steep learning curve for a brand new lawyer coming into this office. So our recruitment actually does come from the University of Oregon. I have a former employee who works in the career placement office. And so when there's a criticism about the lack of diversity in this office, it's not for lack of trying on my part to recruit diversity. I have sought to contact the 1Ls at the law school here locally. We run the prosecution clinic in the office, which, by the way, you need to know how to prosecute a case to be operating the prosecution clinic in your office. And so there's been a lot of efforts at increasing the diversity in recruitment. Retention is a problem because DOJ pays better than my office does. And so the people who stay here are dedicated to prosecution in Lane County because they love it here. They are a part of my team and work with me to achieve the goals of justice in this community. And they have to reflect my values and not screw things up with my name on everything that happens in this office, because ultimately I am responsible.
Thank you.
So, oh, sorry.
We're going to move on to another question. I have a lot of questions, so I want to keep moving forward. I have another question here for you, James. What is your knowledge on how a DA office actually functions? And do you think that you can effectively manage the different departments? You obviously have experience as a police officer, that's without question, but the question that came in was, you're perceived as one with a tremendous lack of experience in the arena of law. So how would you manage an entire department, the district attorney's office with its department and its personnel? 80 people is a lot of people, and $11 million is a big budget. So talk to the voters about your plans to manage that if you're elected.
Yeah, it is a big budget. It is a big job. But, you know, I'll remind people that you know, Ms. Perlow didn't have that experience either before she came in. And a lot of this manages itself. You know, by me coming in as a new district attorney doesn't mean that the $11 million budget is just vanished. Now I got to decide what to pay people, and a lot of it is running as it is. Yes, I do realize how things work. You know, you've got the prosecution realm for the DA's office. You've also got death investigations. You have the family law section, juvenile section, victim services. You know, there's a lot of balls in the air that you have to juggle. And, you know, I realize how that works. I just don't see it as such a drastic change by changing the leadership of the district attorney's office. You know, I think that, you know, our current president, who said he was going to drain the swamp and make all these drastic changes, has found, well, you can't really make that many drastic changes. And presidents before him have found the same issues. So I really don't see that as an issue. But things I would change, you know, she mentioned she has her name on everything. Well, that's actually one of the first things I would do, is take my name off everything. It's the Lane County District Attorney's Office. It's not Patty Perlow District Attorney's Office. It's not the James Cleavenger District Attorney Office. And I think that the kind of idea of ownership is part of the problem, and that's something I'd like to change.
Okay, very good.
Mark, may I address that for a moment?
Yes, ma'am. Let me reset the time, please. Okay, go ahead for your rebuttal.
So the Constitution and the Oregon Revised Statutes establish that the district attorney is ultimately responsible for everything that happens in the office, and their name appears on every charging instrument that goes out, and every complaint that happens in the office. It is the district attorney that has to resolve it. So it's naive to think that it is everybody's district attorney's office. That is not correct. And the federal guidelines related to child support enforcement require a knowledge of what you can and can't do, what you can and can't say. Death investigations are actually very complicated, and managing that team is very complicated. There are 3 people and a host of extra help working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The cases that we prosecute are all under my name, and ensuring the rights of victims are all my responsibility. And so I had 5 years to prepare for that as chief deputy. I was in charge of managing the office from the inside.
Very good, thank you.
Just to clarify, I'm not talking about you know, legal documents. I'm talking about letterhead and just a general sense of entitlement.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask some more general, 1 or 2 more general questions around the office before we get into a lot of the other heavier questions. So, Patty, in your estimation, has the district attorney's office been successful, and if so, why?
The district attorney's office is very successful. Number one, the culture has changed dramatically during the time I've been there. It is one of support for the people who work there from every level. We are a team. Every position in this office is equally important, and we cannot function without the support of each other at every step. Nothing happens unless we all are doing it together. That is a complete culture change. The second culture change is that this used to be a really siloed office. We did our job without any concern for how it impacted the rest of the community, the rest of our public safety partners. Now, everybody is communicating. We have conversations regularly about how each of our efforts impacts the other and how we can improve public safety for the community as a whole. This has been a dynamic, exciting time in the DA's office, and an exciting time in Lane County, as we have just shifted the culture countywide to what can we do with what we have for the people in this community. And I think the people in my office would tell you that they are excited about the mission here. They're excited about the work we do. They find it meaningful and important work, from the office assistant clear up to the senior prosecutors in this office. It is a very effective place to work, and the people who work here are gratified to be able to serve the public.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, so you both had a chance to express your opinions on the effectiveness or the non-effectiveness of the DA's office from your positions. Now we're going to get to some of the other questions that have come in. This one has to do with child sexual abuse. I'll start with you, Patty. You're the incumbent. What would you do to ensure that the victims of child sexual abuse are indeed, what would you do to make sure that the victims of child sexual abuse are indeed represented, the cases are thoroughly investigated, and there's a child will have his day in court, but that there would be a multiple disciplinary child abuse intervention team? Do you have that now, or what is your process to ensure moving forward that that's taking place?
So we do have that now, and actually the goal is to put the case together so well that that child never does have to go to court. Kids First Center is our child abuse intervention center. I'm on the board of Kids First. I work very closely with my office. It is a full service program that provides advocacy, medical assessments, forensic interviews. Our forensic interviewers at Kids First are train the trainers, recognized as experts all over. And so we are very fortunate to have that. Every child that's referred there is referred by law enforcement or DHS to get their full-on assessment to make sure that we are producing the best case. It's reviewed by the multidisciplinary team, so that the law enforcement, DHS, if they're involved, my office, are talking about every case that goes through there, so that none of them are falling through the cracks, to make sure that if a case is prosecutable, it is coming over here and we are filing it and getting it to a successful conclusion. And like I said, we want to make sure law enforcement and our interviews and all are done so well that that child never has to step into court. But if they do have to go to court, they're going to be supported with an advocate. They're going to be supported by the lawyers in my office. They're going to be supported because we are trained in how to deal with victims, child sexual abuse victims at their level, to prepare them to come into court. And it's a terrible experience. No child should ever have to go through being sexually abused, and certainly not have to go through the court process. But we will make it as good for them as it possibly can. If we can keep them just at Kids First, even through the grand jury process over there, so that they don't have to come into the courthouse, that's the best outcome.
Very good, thank you. James, I'm going to set the clock, and same question for you, sir.
Okay, well, I would agree. I mean, I think it would be crazy for someone to disagree that child sex abuse cases are not a priority for the DA's office. There are some issues that I've noticed. One general issue is that lack of notification when an offender is released from jail. Victims can sign up with the Vine system, and they're supposed to automatically be entered into that system, so they know when perpetrators are getting out. That actually hasn't happened in a lot of cases that I've seen, and that may not necessarily be the DA's fault. It may be more the jail level. But I think that law enforcement should be notified as well automatically, just so we know these folks are out there. We've got an individual back in our community right now that has some charges of this type, and has been released pending trial because of COVID-19. But I know they are isolating people in jail, and it just seems reckless to me to have released him when there's certainly no guarantee that he's going to come back for trial, especially because he's from out of state. But yeah, I think that's my answer.
Mark, may I address that?
Yes, ma'am. Let me reset the clock. Go ahead.
So release from the jail is not a function of the DA's office. And in fact, we often are going into court. I have lawyers who go into court to oppose the motions for reduction in security posting or to release somebody from custody. And it's the court that makes that decision. And currently the court is making that decision more often than is probably in the interest of public safety because of COVID-19. With regard to other releases from the jail, again, that is completely out of our hands. We don't have a say on whether somebody is capacity-based release from the jail, or if the court's going to make a reduction in their security, or if the court's not even going to make them have any conditions of release other than signing a release agreement.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. I have another question. I'll start with you, Patty. The DA's office has the prison diversion program that is 90 days, mental health court, drug court, and veterans court. In your opinion, are these successful? And what ways would you like to improve them if you had the resources to do so?
Right, so the prison diversion program is the one I talked about in my opening statement. That's the one where high-risk property offenders are diverted from prison and given intense supervision. The program is very successful for the people who engage. The reason for the 90 days in custody is that we have found that anything less than 90 days, people run from treatment. And it's not just walk from treatment, they run from treatment. And even at 1 day less, it's been unsuccessful. So even public defender's office, everybody involved in that program agrees that 90 days in custody is appropriate. Our treatment courts are terrific. They're successful. The people who graduate from those programs, we only see again from the alumni group. We don't see them recidivating. It is really hard to get people engaged in these programs, and particularly now that possession of controlled substances is a misdemeanor in many cases. There's no incentive for those people to engage in treatment. And so in our treatment courts, we don't have the benefit of that 90 days in custody that we have for the 416 program. And so it takes a long time. The programs for our treatment courts are a minimum of a year, and for drug treatment court. And sometimes it takes as much as 3 years to get somebody through that program. The Veterans Court is terrific. Veterans are the most organized, rigid, show up to court when they're told to be there people that you could ever imagine. And so that program has been terrific in terms of getting people the mental health care they need, getting them housing, and getting them out of the criminal justice system. I can't tout our our treatment courts anymore. That's my favorite part of my job, actually, to go to the graduations. I try never to miss a graduation from one of those programs because it's a huge celebration. And those people they get their kids back, they're taxpayers, they're working or going to school. It's just terrific.
Thank you. James, you also have a statement that you'd like to find ways to stop mass incarceration. If you're elected to the district attorney office, what might you do differently with these courts that we have presently available to the residents? What other ideas might you have to either enhance or add to services that would help people avoid jail and or prison time if possible?
Well, I would agree that these are great programs. In fact, I took a tour of some of the aspects when I was working for Judge McShane, and the Lane County Sheriff's command staff took us on tours of some of these programs. The problem is, to my knowledge, in the last 3 years that I've worked for Oak Ridge, nobody has been able to take advantage of those alternative courts. Again, could be wrong, there might be one or two, but to my knowledge, nobody has been allowed into these programs. And I can't think of anyone allowed into them when I was at Coburg. And if I think all the way back to Junction City, well, I don't even know if the programs existed back then. but that's the problem is access to them. And like I say, sometimes it feels like Oak Ridge is the meth capital of Lane County. We've got plenty of drug problems, believe me, but no one is being able to get access to these programs. So yes, I would continue them. I would support them. I'd want to find additional funding for them, which again is something I think I'll be able to do successfully by building better relationships with our state elected officials in Salem to control the purse for those programs.
Very good. I have some more questions regarding this stream, so I'll ask it. Patty, did you want to respond to anything that he said? Are you okay with that?
The only thing that jumped out at me was the notion of mass incarceration. In Oregon, we have nearly 4 million people in the state, and we have about 15,000 people in state corrections custody. So I would ask my opponent to say, of the people that Lane County has sent to prison, who doesn't belong there? Because those are all violent offenders, sex offenders, people that were so high risk property offenders that they didn't qualify for this 416 program. So I would be curious to know who doesn't belong in prison out of the people that have been prosecuted by Lane County DA's office and sentenced to prison by a Lane County Circuit Court judge.
James, I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
Sure. Well, I don't think most people misunderstand me when I say that I support these alternative programs. I'm not saying do away with the regular court system. Sometimes prison is the only answer. And frankly, in some cases, at least my cases I've dealt with, more people for specific cases need to go to prison. What I was talking about are, your day-to-day drug users who then commit thefts in order to support that lifestyle, if you will. Almost seems like a profession sometimes. That's what I'm talking about. There's no one currently in prison that I think should not be in prison.
Okay, thank you. Next question, we'll start with you, James. If you're elected to district attorney's office and you're determining the validity or the viability of a case, how would you determine if treatment is a better option than incarceration? What methodologies would you implement to come to that decision?
Well, I would trust the science. There are a number of tests that can be run on people to find out if they're going to be successful in these programs. A number of factors, starting at the very basic level: age, sex, criminal history, etc. There are matrices you can look at. We did that all the time in federal court when making similar decisions, which I was involved with. And so, yeah, trust the science, but you've also got to collect more data, which again has been a problem with the current DA's office. Has been reluctant to collect and release even basic demographic data on prosecutions, and it's hard to identify what the problems are and then how to fix them if you don't have the data.
Okay, thank you. All right, Patty, what are some of the methodologies that you use currently as our district attorney to determine if option of treatment is a better option or incarceration is required?
So for the Senate Bill 416 program, there's a very specific manual that was created by the group that ran our random control trial, and it was mirrored with Marion County. And so entry into that program is by specific guidelines that are outlined. It's actually parole. After we identify somebody to suggest that they go into the program, it's actually parole and probation who runs the test and determines whether they're too high risk to go into the program or not. So that's how that program is done. With regard to our treatment courts, the emphasis is on getting everybody into the program that we can who would who's interested in taking it. The problem is that defense attorneys or the defendants oftentimes don't want to take advantage of those programs because they're so difficult. It's actually really hard work to go through those programs, and it's really easy to just take a plea of guilty and get sentenced. And so that's been the problem with expanding or getting more people into the programs. We use downward departures, people who were intended to go to prison sometimes as an incentive to get them to go into those programs. But that actually has been our problem in expanding it, is that people don't want to work that hard to achieve sobriety and get out of the criminal justice system.
Okay, thank you. So these questions have come in, and I'm trying to, I won't be able to get to all of them, but some of them have a dual presentation. So I'm going to start with you, James. If you're elected to the district attorney's office, what do you see as your role in supervising deputy district attorneys? What would you afford to them regarding latitude and how they move forward in the direction of a case? And who would have the ultimate responsibility for misconduct of a deputy district attorney? And how would that be disciplined in your DA office?
Well, obviously, I would consult with HR to make sure that any discipline process was fair and was transparent, so people knew what the system would be. And and the unions are usually pretty good about making sure that you stick to those. And I've been a union member for many years, and I would go to them for questions of how to handle discipline issues and make sure the system was fair. Back to the previous part of that question, part of the culture I would change. I've got a lot of friends that have been in the DA's office and some that still are, and there's a culture now where a lot of DAs feel afraid to lose. They're afraid they're going to get fired if they lose. I think that should change. Again, I think DA should have the courage to move forward on the case, even if it's going to end up being more of a he said, she said sort of situation. Let the jury make that decision of guilt. That's their job. It's not the DA's job to be the gatekeeper and only take slam dunk cases. That's not what justice is. And I would change that culture and let my assistant DAs know that they will be supported as long as they're presenting a good case to the jury. They've done their job. Let the jury decide.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
May I address that?
Well, yes, same question to you, Patty, just could be worded a little bit differently, is how do you manage your deputy district attorneys now? What is your philosophy in allowing them to have latitude to operate within the scope of a case? And if there's any, who has ultimate responsibility for misconduct, and how would you discipline misconduct?
All right, so I would like to say that there is no, that you are required to win your cases or you're going to get fired. I've told my lawyers, you learn more from your losses than you do from your wins, and don't let that affect you and make you afraid to get back into the courtroom. So that was a complete misstatement of the culture of this office. Secondly, I supervise the lawyers with the understanding that when you come into this office, you have a tremendous amount of discretion, and you are affecting people's lives every time you make a filing decision to charge someone with a crime. And so you need to make sure that you have sufficient evidence to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. They are, the new lawyers are supervised by senior attorneys in the office who communicate with each other to make sure that the supervision is the same, that the standards we are setting between the teams is the same, and discipline is handled within the law, but ultimately, the only thing you're going to get fired for from this office is exercising bad judgment. And so the attorneys are at will employees. They are in a bargaining unit. They are not unionized. And so because they are representing me in everything they do, and so they are, of course, going to be very carefully supervised in the early years and fostered and mentored and taught how to be an ethical, effective prosecutor. And we can teach anybody how to try a case. That's really not that difficult, but we can't teach judgment. And so that is the culture that we have here is you have a lot of discretion, you have a lot of power, don't abuse it, do not demonstrate bad judgment.
Thank you. Next question, we'll go ahead and go back to you, James. If you're elected district attorney for Lane County, what is your view on the responsibility of the DA's office to work well together with public defender's office to ensure that justice is done in each case? And what practical steps would you take to make sure this is done that are both positive and professional regarding the relationship between the two offices?
Yeah, that's actually part of one of the many now anonymous emails I've received from inside the DA's office. Some of the complaints they brought forward is there was a pretty public row, if you will, between Ms. Perlow and the public defender that took over the office a few years ago, and it wasn't particularly professional in my opinion, but there may have been more behind it than what was written in the press. I don't know. But, you know, in federal court, that we found that the defenders and the U.S. attorneys got along very well, sometimes even too well. We'd have to prod them to actually advocate against each other sometimes. But there is a lot of animosity still at the Lane County District Attorney's level between the defense and prosecution, and I think that would be something I would try to repair. You know, Ms. Perlow tries to say that the reason there's been a lot of turnover at her office is it's about money. People want to make, you know, a little bit more money going to DOJ. That may be part of it, but money's not everything. And, you know, we get a new list every 2 months of new assistant DAs. And I think there's a little bit more to it than people just changing jobs to chase the money.
Okay, thank you. So Patty, same question to you regarding the relationship between the public defender's office, and you can incorporate your response in your 2-minute time frame to the things that were just mentioned by James.
So Brooke Reinhardt is the Lane County Public Defender, and he and I actually have a much better relationship than I would have anticipated when we first met. For an example, we worked very closely together to address this COVID situation and to have remote court appearances. The court was reluctant to move forward on that. We actually worked really well together to make that happen. He sits on the Public Safety Coordinating Council with me. We talk about advocating. I'm advocating for pay raises for the trial level lawyers in the public defender's office. And so to say that the relationship with me and Brooke Reinhardt isn't good is untrue. And I'm very supportive of the lawyers in his office in making sure that they are adequately paid so that he can recruit and retain. His office is incredibly young. He has more new lawyers than I do in my office. And so we want to be supportive of that. And it's an adversarial relationship, obviously, because criminal law is an adversarial practice. And so the fact that you are, you know, tussling orally in the courtroom does not mean that you have a negative relationship in general. And that relationship starts at the top. And I am surprised that Mr. Cleavenger thinks that the relationship between Brooke Reinhardt and me is negative. It's not.
James, did you want to respond to that with facts?
Well, just insofar as that, you know, I'm talking about the past. You know, relationships can be prepared, and repaired rather, and I'm glad that it has been. I would just point out that there are some issues, and it's interesting to note that I've been endorsed by Clayton Tullis, who is a defense lawyer and ran against Ms. Perlow 4 years ago, and I've got many friends who are defense attorneys because they're like me. They tend to be altruistic souls, and I appreciate what they do. Obviously being a police officer, I've got a different viewpoint, but I like to help people too, just in a different way. So those relationships, I just think could use some improvement.
Okay, very good. I'm going to move on from this point. I'm going to try to get a few more questions in before this hour's up. Okay, James, I'll start with you. What level of, this is kind of a big question. What level of accountability should the DA have to voters? How often should the DA hold forums and/or invite comments from community members? And should there be a responsibility to invite public opinion when formulating policies?
Absolutely, 100%. In fact, I think there should be a citizen review board for the DA's office specifically. A lot of police departments have them, and I think that there should be one for the DA's office. It's broad in its recruitment of individuals for inclusion on that board. I think the public should have input at every level, but starting with that board.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, Patty, same question to you regarding the accountability to the voters and citizen involvement, community involvement.
So the district attorney is elected by the people of Lane County and is accountable. And if the district attorney is viewed as not doing a good job, the district attorney can be removed by vote. And I would argue to you that the people of Lane County voted me in 2016 at 75% of the vote. And I have held public forums. Unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of media anymore in Lane County, they haven't all been as well attended as I would have liked, but I have held public forums. I have gone to community organizations to speak. I have coffee with anyone who will call and wants to talk to me. I return every phone call from a citizen, every email from a citizen who calls me. Absolutely. I believe that I serve the people of Lane County. That is my obligation, and I have been very open and accessible for that very reason. Now, with regard to a citizens review board, yes, those are for city police agencies. My accountability is as an elected official, and so it's not appropriate to have a citizens review board for that particular purpose. But absolutely, I am totally accountable to the people of Lane County, open to them, and take input, answer every phone call, every email, every question that is brought to me, because that's my pleasure that I'm serving at the pleasure of the people of Lane County.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We got a couple of other really big questions I want to try to get to before we run out of time. Excuse me. Patricia, do you agree with the recent Supreme Court decision in Ramos versus Louisiana requiring unanimous juries? And if so, do you support reviewing past cases and possibly retrying cases that were convicted without a unanimous jury?
So that's a big question. Actually, I was part of the DA's Association Executive Board that came out in 2018 asking the legislature to refer that very issue to the voters for a constitutional amendment to require unanimous juries. And the legislature rejected that opportunity and left it to the Supreme Court to give this to us. And so now we are left with our Constitution not being constitutional, a whole bunch of cases that are pending appeal up at the Court of Appeals. Lane County has about 30 cases right now that are pending appeal on that very issue, and we're expecting that those 30 cases are going to come back to Lane County for either resolution or retrial. We're prepared for that. The court is preparing for that as well. With regard to collateral attacks to cases that are already closed, the Supreme Court said that that standard is so high that they weren't sure that anyone would be able to achieve it, but they didn't close the door. So what that means is we're going to have a whole lot of cases being litigated at the post-conviction level to get, we're going to need the appellate court to make a decision about whether or not that is accessible. It's not my decision to make. That's going to be the decision of the appellate courts on whether those other cases are going to come back to us.
Okay, very good. James, same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, I just want to point out, I think this issue could have been fixed a lot sooner had the Lane County DA been supportive of changing the law and simply requiring unanimous juries. I mean, you could see the writing on the wall. We were the only state left doing this. I just think it was a little ridiculous not to push for that reform in our system. But you know, as we've seen from last year when Ms. Perlow was opposed to Senate Bill 1008, the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, you know, she was opposed to something that was bipartisan and, you know, passed with 75% rather than supporting these types of reforms. And I think that's where I would be different.
May I address that?
Yes, go ahead.
So Senate Bill 1008 has absolutely nothing to do with unanimous juries. It was not bipartisan support because there's a supermajority in the legislature. And what we've seen as a result of Senate Bill 10008, because the legislature wouldn't listen to the DAs, is that now the statute was written so poorly that judges can't even interpret it correctly. And so to say that that was wrong, to bring to the attention of the legislature that 10008 had problems is naive, and it's my job to be able to educate the legislature. The fact that they chose not to listen is what has befallen all of the people of the state of Oregon.
Thank you. James, you wanted to respond to that?
Well, I'm just thrilled to know that Ms. Perlow is available to lecture the legislature about their job. I think they're doing a fine job as it is, and I certainly never meant to insinuate that 1008 had anything to do with unanimous juries. Those are separate issues. What I'm talking about is, as the Lane County DA, you should be on the forefront of reforming the system, not trying to keep antiquated things in place that aren't working. Like I said, the writing was on the wall. Unanimous juries were going to be implemented, and we should have dealt with this issue a lot sooner. It would have saved a lot of litigation that we're now going to have to go through.
Well, there's a lot of people that are going to hear this and see this, and they're not going to have any idea what Bill 1008 is. So what is Bill? Patty, we'll go to you, and then we'll come back to you for your understanding, James, and how you would address that. So Patricia, Bill 1008.
So Senate Bill 1008 was the elimination of Measure 11, which is mandatory minimum sentences, and affected automatic remand to adult court for violent felonies, juveniles between ages 15 and 17. And so that includes rape, murder, assault in the first degree, robbery in the first degree. And now we just had our first case where a person who is now 18 years old, but was 16 at the time, almost 17, smashed in the head of a homeless man who was sleeping and killed him, having assaulted a homeless man the night before with the same rock. And because the standards are so poorly written by our legislature, the judge was unable to make a finding that youth should be remanded to adult court, which has set the standard that no youth, regardless of the facts or how bad the case is or their history is, will be remanded to adult court. Same thing happened in Yamhill County, the terrible case, a murder slitting the throat of the woman and then sexually assaulting her, not remanded to adult court because of the way this bill was written.
Okay, very good. James, what would you like to add to your knowledge of 1008 and how you might do things differently?
Well, I would agree there are some issues that can be fixed with the bill, but overall it needed to be changed. The way it was working is that a 15-year-old who committed one of these crimes in these areas, such as a robbery, where let's say no one actually got hurt, was automatically tried as an adult on Measure 11 crimes and was facing, decades in prison automatically. And that's the overall part that needed to change, because the cases aren't always as horrendous as the cases that Ms. Perlow's brought up. Sometimes it's simply a 15-year-old doing something very, very, very stupid by getting involved in a robbery. But each situation is different, and a judge should be able to view each situation individually.
Okay, thank you.
May I answer that for just a moment?
Yes.
I would ask my opponent to provide, and I can give him the list of every juvenile Measure 11 from Lane County that was treated as an adult through the system to find one of those cases that he just described.
Okay. James, any comment?
Well, I mean, I know of one from Multnomah County, actually a friend of mine, Robert White, who Judge McShane had to sentence as an adult for something he did when I can't remember, he was 15 or 16, and he was looking at decades in prison, and he did everything right when he was in jail, got degrees. He now speaks nationally through a foundation. I mean, just the model citizen, so much so that when he was released from jail, and by the way, the only way to release him was for the governor to step in and expunge it, and was doing so well that Judge McShane actually let this gentleman live at his house for a number of months when he was released. And that's a success story that I've seen personally. But other individual cases in Lane County, obviously, I'm not. I can't think of any specifically, but that's one where it touched my life.
Very good, thank you. I want to get to a couple of more questions before we get to closing statements, please. Patty, there's been some concerns that the current DA's office does not have, the DDAs do not have adequate training or understanding of domestic violence issues, domestic violence consequences on individuals. What would you say to that? How do you train your staff? How do you ensure that there's accountability in regards to interaction between deputy district attorneys and victims?
So domestic violence is a very complex issue anyway. The people who report domestic violence oftentimes recant because of their circumstances. Either it's a financial situation, a feeling threatened, whatever it is. And so the dynamics between my office and a domestic violence victim are very challenging and require a lot of finesse. And because of that, I have a dedicated team for prosecuting domestic violence cases, supervised by a lawyer who's been in the office for about 20 years and has devoted the majority of his career to domestic violence and understands those dynamics very well. The domestic violence team spends a lot of time talking amongst themselves and with their team leader about their cases and what's appropriate in each of those cases, and how to proceed on a case where a victim doesn't want to participate in the prosecution. And we continue with those cases without the victim if it's in the community's best interest and if it's in, the offender needs to be held accountable. And so to say, what kind of training do we have specific to domestic violence? There are programs that are provided through the Department of Justice that we send the lawyers to. They are able to attend training on how proper interview is conducted, and they are very well supervised within the specific team for that type of case.
Very good. James, question for you. If you're elected to Lane County District Attorney, what would some of your emphasis be to ensure that victims of domestic violence feel addressed and represented clearly by any DDA that they have interaction with, as well as the District Attorney's Office?
Well, access to the assistant DAs is a good starting point. You know, like I say, a lot of times we don't even know who's handling our cases, and so when victims ask us, we sometimes don't know where to turn. We give them the general number, and then they'll call and they'll be on hold for 20 minutes and they give up. There's also been some specific cases. One was horrendous. A woman in my community had her leg broken in a domestic violence incident. Come to find out, it had been ongoing for the last year plus, and she saved pictures, and she ended up showing me the pictures. And we're talking about multiple attacks over the year, but she didn't report it. And I asked why, and she told me that she wasn't reporting that stuff because a year prior she did report, and in fact, the perpetrator held up in the house with the children with a weapon. SWAT was on their way before we finally got him to come out. He went to jail, was released the very next day without any victim notification, came back to the house, said, hey, how you doing? And so she felt completely abandoned by the system, and obviously she wasn't gonna report anything else because that didn't turn out too well for her. So, you know, and that's admittedly one story. That's not the way it's supposed to work, and I think that's not the way it usually works. But I would agree that with the specialized trainings for special teams, especially in cases of domestic violence, is a good idea, and that would continue.
Thank you. All right, one final question before closing comments. Lane County has a significant rural community, and there's concern that they're not having access or enough response times to their needs, smaller police forces, police officers, or cases. As the current district attorney, Patty, how do you ensure, what actions are you taking to make sure that smaller rural communities are being heard, being responded to, and being duly represented?
So the definition of rural, by our grant standards, Oak Ridge doesn't even count as rural, which is surprising and disappointing. But the Lane County Sheriff's Office has maybe 4 people on patrol at any given time to cover 4,700 square miles outside the incorporated area. So yeah, the response is completely inadequate. We need to support better funding and increase a police presence. Lane County has one of the worst police numbers, law enforcement numbers in the state, and our state is incredibly low compared to the national average. We don't have enough police officers in general in the entire county. Our small cities are poorly resourced to be able to adequately fund a police department. They have a hard time recruiting and retaining because they can't pay. As soon as talent is recruited, trained, and able to actually function in a strong capacity, larger police agency hires them for more money. It's really a difficult and challenging situation. And so what we do to support that is we provide 24-hour police legal advisor on pager to be able to answer questions that police officers may have from any of the 11 agencies in Lane County. I have great relationships with most of the chiefs in Lane County, and we have regular meetings and conversations about how cases are processed and what we can do. I know in Cottage Grove, Chief Shepard has said his staff is incredibly young. but he gets some individualized training down there. We've offered to do that for him. He wants to know, when we read the reports, we report back to him what some of the shortcomings are so that he can better train his staff as well.
Thank you. Now, James, you have been a police officer in some of the smaller communities in Lane County, Coburg, Junction City, and now Oak Ridge. If you're elected as our next district attorney, what would you do based on those experiences to ensure the needs are being addressed of the smaller police departments, the smaller rural communities, and make sure that they feel properly represented by the district attorney's office?
Yeah, smaller towns are definitely being ignored. Yeah, I've been in law enforcement for 10 years. I've never seen an acting district attorney come to any of those departments in those 10 years. I'm talking about the district attorney herself or himself. That's something I would change. It's already part of my platform. I would dedicate time to me, specifically me, going to every single small department once a year to provide annual legal training, but also just to meet the officers and make those connections so they're not feeling ignored. Ms. Perlow said that, she prosecutes every case where there's probable cause.
I did not say that.
That's just simply not true, or where the evidence is good enough, whatever you said. But when you're only prosecuting 20% of our cases, I mean, you're saying 80% of our cases are just awful? I mean, first of all, they're not, but I mean, it's a bit ridiculous. And the idea that you're making connections with us isn't true. I mean, we invited you to a town hall forum, which you declined to come to. Sheriff came, but you didn't come, and that's just kind of been the status quo with my experience with the DAs working in small towns. So definitely something I would want to change, and I would be reaching out physically myself, going to those departments once a year.
Okay, very good. Patty, do you want to respond real quick before we get to closing comments?
I do. With regard to the town hall, I wasn't invited to the town hall because I was contacted by one of the city councilors talking about the town hall. And when I went to the city and told them what I would say about why we weren't filing cases, they elected not to invite me to that proceeding.
Thank you. All right, so we need to get to closing statements. To all those that submitted questions, I apologize, I cannot get to all of them. But we're going to begin with James. James, you have 3 minutes, sir, to make your final appeal to the voters for your candidacy to the Lane County District Attorney's Office, sir.
Sure. When I filed my whistleblowing lawsuit against the U of O, specifically the University of Oregon Department of Public Safety, the police department, a lot of people told me you can't win. You're going up against an entity that's too big, too powerful. You can't do it. But I did. And I stuck to it for 3 years, even though I was personally attacked and ruined my marriage, etc. I kept to it because it was the right thing to do. And if I didn't do it, other people were going to be hurt. That's the same reason I've decided to take on this challenge of running for district attorney, is because I believe it's the right thing to do. I believe current district attorney is not leading the office properly, and it needs to change, and that's why I'm running despite the odds. I think my record, speaks for itself, and again, I would just encourage people to check out my website, see my platform. I'm happy to answer emails and any questions people might have. And I appreciate you, especially Mark, taking the time. I know these things are hard to put together. I really appreciate being able to have the opportunity to reach out to voters. So thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you. Let me reset the clock. Okay, Patty, 3 minutes for your final comments to the voters.
Well, I would like the voters to know that experience really does matter. This is a position that requires being able to manage an office, being able to have outreach to the community partners, knowing how to prosecute a case matters. Knowing how to try a case matters. Knowing how to supervise people, how to manage union, how to manage discipline, how to manage an office matters. How to create engagement in the community matters. Integrity matters. I have been completely honest about my record and what I have done to go forward as your district attorney. My opponent has listed himself as a practicing attorney all over, and yet has not practiced law, or at least has told the bar that he is not practicing law, filing exempt from paying professional liability. And so either he was not demonstrating integrity to the bar, or he's not demonstrating integrity to you. Integrity matters in a position like this that is all about following the rules of ethics. And the programs that we have instilled and the work that I have done in this office have made vast improvements in the lives of the people coming through the criminal justice system and for public safety in Lane County. And the platform that my opponent has, including increasing the programs that I've already started when we're facing 17% budget cut in the next biennium from the state, which provides the funding for those programs, is naive. And one of his other platforms is that he wants to bring a standalone sexual assault nurse examiner position here to Lane County. I've actually been working on that, and it's not something the DA does alone. It's not something the DA just opens a medical facility. You work with other people, you find a facility, and you get other people to staff it, but it is through your leadership that you make that happen. And that is why experience matters. Experience in leadership, experience in management, and obviously integrity is very important. And as we're going into this economic crisis, you want somebody who knows how to navigate through that and is going to be able to come out on the other side of it as strong as we are going into it. And so I would ask the voters of Lane County to continue to support me in providing this service that I am so grateful for the opportunity to have. And Mark, I really want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk to the public.
Thank you. All right, that's the forum for this evening. I want to thank you, Patty Perlow, James Cleavenger, for your willingness to participate, for those that have logged on to hear the forum. Thank you for all those that submitted questions. I apologize we could not get to all of them. I hope that all of you feel you're allowed to represent yourselves well and your positions well this evening. We look forward to the will of the voters on May 19th. With that being said, thank you for tonight, and we bid you all both the best of luck in your campaigns, and that we thank you for your participation in the democratic electoral process.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Have a good night.